It's 2:45.
So you need to leave 5 minutes earlier than that. I'm going to give you a introduction. You give a talk. If you could leave a few minutes to take questions, then that'd be greatly appreciated. And I'm very grateful to you. This is Alex, one of our witnesses. Yes, right. We're starting. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention once again? I hope you're all watered, fed, refreshed, raring to go, which is for what is going to be an equally interesting second half to this conference. Just in case there are any visitors from the moon here, we're in the midst of a general election, and my feeling is that the range of parties is far greater than ever before. We're extremely lucky to have to speak to us the deputy leader of the Green Party, Amelia Womack, who has lengthy experience of Green campaigning, an academic background, 2 degrees in relevant subjects, and can give us the view from the work face as it is. Unfortunately, these kind of people are under massive pressure. Believe it or not, this is the oasis in her day. She has kind of wall-to-wall interviews about every manner. We're very grateful for you coming to talk about that. Please, if you'd like to take the lecture.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an important topic, talking about international trade. Because I think the more that we're looking at this, the more that people realise that we're letting money move freely across borders. But then, from the other parties, we're not seeing the same opportunities for people or legislation. And when pollution moves across borders, the fact that the UK isn't really stepping up to the mark in terms of its pollution commitments, if you look at air quality in London, then it really proves the fact that we need to be looking at our trade, and we need to be looking at our global impact in terms of law and regulation. And I mean, I really want to begin by talking about, I just want a moment of reflection really on the fact that we've had this huge green surge. I don't know if you know about this, but basically I was elected deputy leader back in September. When I was elected, we had 18,000 members of the Green Party, and today, I actually just got my email this morning to say that officially our membership has now gone past 29,000 members. Yeah. We've seen... I mean, you can't put this surge down to one reason and one reason alone, but many people are arguing that as we see an increase in globalization, people are looking at politics in a whole different way. And they're looking at the agendas of trade and how it's impacting our environment, how it's impacting our society, and especially with things like TTIP, which I understand has come up a lot today, when all of the struggles that we've had to get that environmental protection and to get our employment rights could be overridden by international trade laws, then people are really waking up to what globalization is and the impact that it's having on our lives. Globalization means different things for different people. On the one hand, it sounds positive, a smaller, more interconnected world. But for many people, especially the poorest in the world, it's come to represent something altogether different. What we've got at the moment is a world trade system that runs for the benefit of multinational corporations rather than for people. The institutions involved in world trade, like the WTO and the IMF and the World Bank, have for too long pushed for a free trade agenda on behalf of the world's richest nations. What we in the Green Party are talking about is reversing these years of damage that have been done by these free marketeers across the world. We're offering bold solutions to globalization and meeting the globalization challenge. How are we going to do this? To begin with, I mean, some of the issues brought up by international trade at the moment are mind-boggling. When there was a journalist who told a story of picking up a toothpick in, I apparently say the word tooth really odd, so I mean like teeth in the... so a toothpick in America, and he was looking at the wood, and he was like, well, this is American wood. He was a botanist. He knew what kind of tree this toothpick had come from. And he saw on the packaging that it had been made in Japan. And it meant he looked into the details of where this toothpick had come from. And it had basically been, the trees had been cut down in America, then transported to Japan, where it was turned into these toothpicks and then brought back into America, bringing that into the world, that the way that the regulation works, that this was more efficient than actually just creating toothpicks in America. And so what we think is really important is that we want to relocalize our economy. And that means creating decent manufacturing jobs in Britain. It means an end to outsourcing of all our manual work to cheap labourers in faraway countries. We need to encourage low-carbon sectors of our economies to expand and create jobs, and encourage high-carbon sectors to contract. We need to legislate against extreme power of vast corporations instead of furthering the interests in agreements like TTIP. I am always bringing an example with TTIP, which is, I've heard that it's come up quite a lot today, so you all know that it's an international trade agreement between America and Europe. The Greens have done some amazing work on this. What very few people realise about the Green Party is that you have the local party, and that feeds into your regional Green Party. So if you are I live in Brixton, so I'm in the Lambeth Green Party, which feeds into London Green Party, and then I'm part of the Green Party of England and Wales. That then feeds into the European Greens. And we're the only political party that work on a cross-nation basis to find policy to work together to influence policy that we see as green policy. We come together every 4 years and discuss what we're going to do as a Green Party across Europe. We've got MEPs working together. We were the fourth largest group in the European Parliament, but that's gone down now. We're now the sixth as a result of the last European election. But more importantly than that, that actually then feeds into the global Greens. So the Green parties from all around the world come together every 4 years to discuss policy that we believe is important on an international basis. That means you've got Green parties from America and Green parties from Sudan debating climate policy and how we work internationally on tackling these huge challenges that are facing our society today. But what I think is really important about this is the fact that we bring it back down to the local decision-making, local impact, and local campaigning. We want to insist on strong environmental and labour protections on global deals. And we need to ensure that the standards that these deals make other countries include strict environmental and labour standards. We shouldn't be signing away the rights of workers here or abroad, where we do trade deals with other countries. It feels like at the moment we've got this race to the bottom in terms of even looking at things like pollution havens or forcing so many people in India and China to be working on such low wages that mean that they can't survive on the day-to-day. That we've been funding our environmental destruction of the world quite happily from the UK without seeing the impacts that it's having on an international basis. We also need to ensure that we work with the most important trading partner, the EU, in tightening cross-continental protections. For example, the Green Party's MEPs have worked to ensure that the Common Agricultural Policy has stronger environmental protections, and EU rules around GM crops are strict, and that the whole EU trading bloc signs up to climate change commitments. We also oppose TTIP. Now, I think that this was mentioned already today about TTIP and the impact that it has. We were just discussing now that one of the huge issues of TTIP is that it's happening behind closed doors. So we can all speculate on what's actually happening with this trade agreement, with people who have no elected responsibility, aren't being held to account by the population because they've not been elected. And it's actually the Greens in Parliament that put lots of pressure on to make sure that we've got more elected officials into those negotiation rooms. Played such an important role in that, and we're very clear on what if that trade agreement happens. We do not want to see a trade agreement that undermines workers' rights or environmental rights. That we want to see, we want to make sure that it's open and transparent, and that there are elected officials actually being involved in these negotiations. Because what does a trade deal like that mean for the environment? I think it's been brought up today, but I really love the example of the Danish bottle case, which was in Denmark, the beverage industry actually suing an entire country as a result of their reusable bottle scheme, which, let's face it, has strong environmental standards, is something that really promotes a more environmental way of life, yet the beverage industry saw it destroying their marketing because they weren't able to make their bottles into nice and pretty shapes. But as you probably know, so Denmark did win that case. But what would it have meant if that had been the other way around? What if they'd lost? And we're going to be seeing that with issues like fracking. We've been working across Europe to try and stop fracking. We've had successes in places like France, but we've seen Wales and Scotland saying that they don't want fracking in their areas. But if we have international regulation that means that our environmental protection, the laws around our environment are completely undermined, what does that mean in terms of fracking coming to the UK? Or worse, one of the arguments that I get on Twitter whenever I talk about fracking is, it's not going to be the same as in America. All of those chemicals that they say that they use in America, we wouldn't have that in the UK because our laws are stronger. Will our laws really be stronger if we have a trade agreement that undermines those, saying that using different chemicals are better in the name of competition? I think that it's something we really need to challenge because we've just seen Texas, actually the motherland of fracking, have a referendum where they banned it as a result of the impact it's having on their communities. And New York itself has banned it because of the health implication of these chemicals. But if we have an agreement that says that our laws need to change as a result of competition, where would we be on that global arena? It was a central part to our European election campaign, and still to this day, we're completely opposed to any new TTIP arrangement between the UK and the US. And it's damaging for so many reasons. All of these trade agreements don't have the environment and people at the heart of them. They have free market economics at their very heart. We want to see, ultimately, what we're proposing here isn't actually that radical. We're saying that we need to rebalance the global economy in favour of producing more of the things we need closer to our home. We're saying that when we get stuff from abroad, it should be made or picked or processed by workers on a living wage, and all of them working to high environmental standards. It's not radical to say that we need to build a global economy that isn't built on the premise of using up all the Earth's resources. Yet, we're actually the only ones saying it. I think it's really important that we're getting these green voices in Europe that are defending against these trade agreements that are protecting the environment and protecting workers' rights. And hopefully we can get more MPs like Caroline Lucas into Parliament that can continue to do that here in the UK as well. Thank you. I've left loads of time for questions, so...
Thanks very much, Amelia. There's lots of interesting points there. You seem to be saying that the Green Party is emphatically opposed to TTIP. I mean, just giving you a sort of last opportunity, that isn't qualified in a way. There isn't kind of any set of conditions or qualifications which would make it an acceptable arrangement.
One of the things of working on an international basis is that in the UK we're completely against TTIP. I can't actually speak on behalf of Germany or other nations, but we've been working together to make sure that there's more transparency and on an international basis making sure that fundamentally our environmental protection and workers' rights aren't undermined by it. But in the UK, we're completely against it. But I'm not 100% sure about the individual level of each country across Europe, but we are working to make sure it doesn't undermine everything.
Questions? like to say who you are, your affiliation.
Hi, my name's Joe Newbegin. I'm here as a representative for the UK Environmental Law Association, but I ask this question in entirely personal capacity. A political challenge is the title of your speech, and for the New Left there is an ongoing challenge to frame discussions and challenge assumptions. When you talk about relocalisation, as I have done with other people recently, the topic that always kind of comes from this is people saying, well, are you not encouraging protectionism and taking back free trade and liberalism back to a stage it was in the 30s or the 40s? How would you respond to a comment such as that and the challenge of delinking localisation from protectionism?
Just one at a time, or do you want to do three?
Yes, if you...
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and I think we've seen the impact of globalization on our environment, and it's not been a good impact. It means that we're not seeing the destruction of rainforests, we're not seeing the impact of climate in quite the same way as if it was brought back onto a local basis. And I think we've got the notion of kind of living in the past is an interesting one because it's brought up in so many different levels. When you talk about the NHS, for example, people say, oh, you're living in the past because you want the NHS back into public hands, where actually it's probably one of the most popular policies that we have. And it's not necessarily going back to living in the past, it's finding new ways to adapt a local economy into an increasingly global society. That it's not necessarily harking back entirely back to the 1930s, but realising that we can't continue this system where it costs the same amount to import. We import the same amount of milk as we export as a result of tax issues. Now we've got all of these kind of these mind-boggling idiosyncrasies as a result of our international trade and globalization, and we really need to be tackling that and really thinking about a system that works on a local basis that has the environment in the centre of it and has people at the heart of it and not multinational corporations.
Thank you. I know you've got a dash shortly, but perhaps one more question.
Right. My name's Wendy Lalas. I'm here in a private capacity. Decades ago, I was trained as an economist and then went in the direction of the environment and law and so on. But decades ago, it seemed to me that Adam Smith type of economics was based on the environment being a free good. The neoliberals see the market as the solution to everything, but the environment is still a free good. My question to you is, what price do you put on the environment? Because, I mean, it's like unscrambling the eggs to attempt, I'm not saying it can't be done, but to attempt to do what you're doing, sympathetic though I am.
I think that it's not about putting a price on the environment. When everything was happening in America with Martin Luther King and getting equal rights for black people, one of the things that economists wanted to do was to put a value on black people and say that, you know, they bring this much into the economy as a result of culture and music. I mean, that's not a helpful way to fight for equality and not a helpful way to change things in politics. My background, I worked as an end ecocide campaigner, and the idea of ecocide being the long-term destruction of the environment. I started to do this about 2 years ago, and no one had heard of that word, and I feel like increasingly I talk to audiences that understand what ecocide is. So a bit like genocide, but using the environment, saying that it's for the environment. And things like international laws that protect the environment rather than just putting a value on them are so important. I wrote a thesis on this, and when you look into how people operate once you say you cannot destroy the environment in that way, people are innovative. We find solutions around it. You look at books such as Zero Noughts, which basically was looking at companies and saying you cannot... You've got to have zero rubbish to landfill. And most companies, once they're set this challenge, find ways such as upcycling or close other systems where they can send their rubbish, or the reduction or reusing of waste products, that meant that in so many cases people nearly met, or I think they might have even met this zero target. I think that things like laws are so important, because if we had a law such as ecocide, we'd be looking at the Arctic now and people talking about drilling in the Arctic, and that you'd basically say, you can't do that, that's ecocide. Or even with fracking, it would mean that you've got the protection of the environment ahead of an agenda that's just purely financial. Can we really put a price on... you could put a price on the gas that will come out of fracking, but can you really counteract that against the long-term damage that's going to have in terms of climate change, local pollution, and the fact that, well, quite frankly, the local communities in the area don't actually want it. And it's what I think is really important about this is the way that we are addressing this in so many different ways. It's not just politics, people in politics such as the Green Party who are talking about the environment and the need for these changes in laws and legislation, but you do have businesses and you have people adapting to try and meet these demands. And I think that there are so many challenges ahead of us, but without laws or regulations, we're not going to use the innovation to meet those demands.
Have you time for another question?
Yeah.
I know Amelia's got to catch a cab to her next interview. It's a busy day, but...
Hi Amelia, thank you for speaking. I'm Sam, I'm the treasurer on this committee. Do you think that there's too much ego involved in these discussions rather than valuing the environment and what we can get out of the environment based on finances?
I think I always draw a kind of pyramid when I talk about these things, where I have the environment as the very bottom block, and then on top of that you've got people in society, and then on top of that the economy and business and the economy, because basically everything comes from the environment. There are no people on a dead planet, and without people then on the planet turning those resources into goods and services, then actually you don't have any business. There's no business on a dead planet, and there's no economy on a dead planet. And I feel like the language that's used around a lot of these negotiations, using purely business and economic systems in trying to advance just purely business and economic systems, means that you're missing out these very bottom factors of the pyramid, the very foundations of the pyramid. I don't know if ego is the right word, but I think we do have far too much focus on these areas, because you need to be taking account of it as a whole system and not just addressing small parts that don't account for the fact that your business wouldn't exist without these other blocks below it. I've probably got more time for a couple more if there are any more.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Laura Fattar. I'm a student at City Law School. I'm really pro-green, let me just start by saying that. One of the arguments that I often come up against when trying to talk to people about the environment and the importance of protecting it is that obviously if we bring in some of these policies in the UK, as you say, we do work in a global system, in a global world, and that could deter foreign investments. We may be sacrificing, quite a lot of opportunities to make profits. Do you think that it's possible to become this green as the UK and expect to be able to kind of carry on? I mean, do you see any particular... Are you trying to mitigate the loss of investment and the loss of profit through any other means, or not?
I think so. I mean, things with the ecocide project is that you're talking about a global law, and that when we work in a globalized market and a globalized society, actually the fact that we're not applying our laws on a global basis, I think is just causing a lot of these ongoing issues that we have. That when you look at what's happened in the Niger Delta, for example, with Shell oil spilling out across entire regions that have destroyed the local population and was also destroyed the environment there, they're not held to account by any international law, and they're not held to account by the laws in their own countries because they're acting in Nigeria. And by having stronger international laws, I think that's a really important step. It's vital, really. If, as I keep saying, if money can move around the world so freely, we need to have a way to protect our environmental systems and make sure that we're not destroying resources in someone else's country in the name of progress in our own.
Final question, I think.
Hi, my name's Alison, representing the Rights of Nature, European Citizens Initiative campaign at the moment. You've mentioned ecocide, and I was wondering what's the Green Party's views on legislation to do with the rights of nature?
We actually passed, so I'm going to just clear up a lot of issues about Green Party policy, because I think that what's in the media and what's actually happening in real life, the more I get involved in politics, I realise they're quite different things. We have a policy for a sustainable society that we want to work towards. Now, this is a long-term vision, a vision that we might put in, that if we had a green government, it might take 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years to achieve. But without long-term, we believe that without long-term goals, that you can't actually achieve what you're trying to achieve. That you have long-term goals in your career, in a business, in your personal life, and that if politics is basically looking at the 5-year cycle and only applying policies based on that, then it's not looking towards a future that you want to build. Now, our manifesto is merely stepping stones to get there. We actually, in our policy, we do have our policies made by our members. We come together at conference twice a year and produce evidence-based policy that's discussed, debated and voted on by our members. And I think it was 2 years ago, we actually put the law of ecocide into our policy for a sustainable society that we want to work towards in the future.
I think I have to
Brilliant.
Conclude things there. I'm extremely grateful we have the deputy leader of a main political party here, who I'm sure has a lot on her plate with all the electioneering that goes on. I hope the rest of your day is as successful as this session has been, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
So is somebody going to take you to your taxi or what is that? From the practical politician to the politician's advisor, as I say, the world of environmental law policy is quite a small one, and you keep meeting people you haven't seen for quite a while, so I'm really delighted to meet up again with Tom Burke, who is an environmental policy advisor, chairman of E3G, visiting professor, trustee of Green Alliance. It goes on and on. His distinction is fantastic. Is advised at the last count 3 government ministers on the environment, and we're really fortunate to Tom, who's going to address the point which was actually raised in a question earlier today. His talk is entitled TTIP Climate Change Catastrophe, so we're really pleased to have you here to talk to us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always slightly disconcerting, especially when you get to my age, to have somebody introduce you by reading out a kind of foretaste of your obituary.
Wasn't intended that way.
As William said, I've been around in the environmental community for a very long time now. I was adding up, it's about 40 odd years since I first started working at Friends of the Earth, and it's kind of a pleasure really to be talking to an audience of environmental lawyers. One of the unintended consequences of all of that was was to change something about environmental lawyers, not just the law. There were no environmental lawyers when I set out, none at all. And it's really amazing to see that actually, whatever else we have, we managed to get a lot of environmental lawyers. And I'm sure the world is a better place for that. I thought I'd do two things this afternoon. I thought I'd say a little bit about why catastrophe, not that I actually chose that word myself, but actually there is a very real sense in what's happening as a catastrophe. It's a sort of slow motion catastrophe, but it's not the wrong word. So I'll say a little bit about climate change and what's driving climate change, and then I'll introduce you to the mysteries of TTIP's Regulatory Cooperation Council and show why that's probably not going to help us deal with climate change very much and may actually make it harder. Climate change is a very interesting problem because we know exactly what's causing it. We know exactly what we've got to do and where we've got to get to in order to retain a climate we can all live in, a climate in which the change at least remains manageable. And that's now got a very precise number on it. We have to keep the world's eventual rise in the average temperature around the globe to below 2 degrees centigrade. Now, lots of people talk about that as a target. That's because they're not keeping up to date with what's actually happened in the climate negotiations. It's an obligation. Every government in the world has undertaken as a formal obligation in the UN Framework Climate Convention to work to avoid dangerous climate change. And when the governments of the world in Cancun agreed that 2 degrees was the, as it were, threshold of dangerous climate change, it turned a target into an obligation. Obligations are rather more important to than targets. Targets you can change and move, and we'll probably hear a lot of people as we run up to the meetings in Paris at the end of this year suggest that, you know, we're really not going to achieve 2 degrees, we should change the target. Actually, you can't change obligations just like that. And just in case you're thinking about it, any government that wished to change the obligation would first of all have to propose why going above 2 was now no longer dangerous. They'd find that quite difficult to do. So we're stuck with, or committed to, I don't mind which one you choose, we're stuck to or committed to 2 degrees as the goal. That's where we've got to get to. We're to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees, or we will progressively end up with an unmanageable climate in which, by the way, one of the things that really gets talked about in this context, one of the things that will be most at risk in a world that is above 2 degrees is the rule of law itself. As when you start thinking about icebergs melting and ice sheets melting and catastrophic or damaging weather events, extreme weather events and so on, they're only the sort of, as it were, the symptoms of what a climate change really means. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. But the rule of law matters a lot to me because there isn't any way we could protect the environment in any of its dimensions unless we're able to maintain the rule of law. The fossil fuel industry, the fact that the fossil fuel industry only exists because we buy its products. If we didn't buy its products, it wouldn't exist. But the fossil fuel industry is the cause of climate change, just as we are the cause of climate change by using its products. It projects a future for itself. All of the various reports that have come out, actually quite a lot of them in the last few weeks, talk about a bright future for the fossil fuel industry. Oil and gas will be using about 2/3 more than we're using today by 2050. And all those people, and we've just heard the Chief Executive of Shell in effect say, all those people who want to stop us doing that are immoral because they're preventing poor people from getting access to the energy you need to have a good life. I mean, when you hear somebody using that kind of argument and you suspect you are in the presence of a bully who's trying to bully you into agreeing with him, you're quite right. That really is just bullying, and it's kind of bizarre attempt by an industry that has some really important questions to answer to try to put itself on the right side. Now, its projections, 2/3 more, happy future, keep your investments, are all going to be safe. It won't happen. It's not actually going to happen. It's a very interesting thing. When you look at those models on which they've based it, none of them factor in any impact of a rising temperature on economic growth. So in all of those models, you have population goes up, demand goes up, production goes up, the temperature goes up, and everything's all right. Except it's not all right, because all of that growth is entirely dependent on rising real incomes of the bottom 2 quartiles of the urban populations in emerging economies. Unless poor people get wealthier, unless they prosper, that growth will not happen. But those are exactly the people, as the temperature goes from its current almost 1 to 2 over the next 20, 30 years and beyond 2 after that, if the fossil fuel industry has its way, those are exactly the incomes that are destroyed by food price spikes, by water price spikes, by extreme weather events. There's no growth in Tacloban 2 years after that hurricane took it apart. There will not be any growth in Vanuatu for a very, very long time. Earlier this year, there was a tanker hijacked by an armed gang in Sao Paulo. Anybody like to guess what was in the tanker?